This week on The Futurists, it's Raitt.
When it starts to become physical, when robots start to actually do your laundry and build the products and do things and free up time, that we will have, as a society, come up with a way to talk about automation so that we can actually take the profits of automation and use it to pay for the livelihoods of the displaced workers and make society better.
Hey there, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tursick, and my co-host, Brett King, once again is airborne someplace in the Middle East, so we won't be able to get him on the call today. But I do have a really special guest, somebody I've wanted to bring on the show for some time. You know, ever since we started doing this program, there's been this debate raging about artificial intelligence, actually several different debates about artificial intelligence. But one of the ones that keeps popping up is that somehow AI is a threat to artists or it's stealing from artists or something like that. Listeners to the show will recall that we've had a couple of attorneys on the call, copyright experts. Amir Gavi, who happens to defend a couple of the AI companies in the litigation that's happening right now, the copyright infringement litigation. And we also had Peter Chadi, who is a very outspoken proponent for the rights of copyright holders. And he and I had a lively debate, both live in New York on stage and also on the show. So I've heard kind of both sides of the legalistic debate, but then I thought about it more. And I was like, what I really want to do is talk to somebody who's using AI as an artist and who doesn't think it's totally evil and the end of the world, but in fact, maybe opening a new chapter for creative expression. And that's why I decided to invite on the show Raitt. Welcome to The Futurists, buddy.
Hey, good to see you, man.
It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for making time to do this. So on this show, what we love to do is talk about the future. We want to talk to you not only as an artist, as a technologist, as an innovator, but also somebody who's shaping the future in your work. And I thought what we might do as a starting point is talk about what you've done, like your career, because I think it's so interesting. One of the things I noticed, is you and I both had similar careers in the sense that we've lived through these transitions or transformations every decade or so. It seems like the media universe goes through another gyration, and it turns out to be something different, something maybe better, certainly faster, bigger, and more participatory in some respects because it's all on a network now. And I thought, why don't we do that real quickly? Like, let's just take a snapshot of some of your career highlights. You started your career in comic books in the 80s and 90s, right?
Yeah, I like to joke that I have the dream job of every 14-year-old. I've been really lucky in the sense that I've got to work at the top of comics, the top of games, the top of movies and VFX, and the top of tools and tech. I was really lucky as a teenager. I got a job working for Steve Oliff at Ole Optics on the early Image comic books. So I worked on Spawn and The Pit and the Max and Akira and some Batman books. I was just a junior kid. Everybody there was Titans. I was just, the newbie in the corner. But, those were on really old computers, typing in CMYK values and sending them to Todd McFarlane's Uncle Tony to print them out and making the very first like high color glossy comics and using the very first, Photoshop to color a comic book kind of back when it was brand new. I was one of those guys. Again, I was a kid in the room and there was a bunch of amazing people. But then after that, I was really lucky. I got to work on the very first motion capture, live to tape children's television stuff. So like you put on a mocap suit and perform a TV show. I helped build those characters and built the first VR characters. And then after that, I went and worked and I built Gollum's face for the Lord of the Rings movies down in New Zealand at Weta. And I actually designed and built the software that I made with a big team of people who had actually invented the computer graphics sort of field from the symbolics.com, which was the first URL on the web. I found like the old graybeard geniuses in the mountains, and we all built a tool together. And that's what I actually used to build Gollum's face and help set up the creature department and the crowd department and the modeling department at Weta. And then I went and worked at the Weta workshop as a concept artist and a sculptor. So I'm like the weird unicorn that's not supposed to exist. I write code, but I also draw and sculpt and animate and direct. And so I went from there and I went to work at Valve for 9 years. And I worked on a movie making tool called the Source Filmmaker, which is a movie making tool built inside of Valve's game engine.
And for people who are listening, Valve is a major game publisher, if you're not familiar with the game business. So you went to a game company and helped them make movies.
Yeah, and basically, I also worked on their games, but I worked on a game called Team Fortress 2, which we discovered in a kind of by accident this really amazing way to collaborate with the crowd. We had 130 million people connected directly to our offices, and we were basically selling hats, virtual items inside the game, and we would feature those hats in our shorts, and the community just went berserk, making and contributing back to the universe in something that I helped set up called the Steam Workshop. So you basically had this sort of virtuous cycle between the creator and the audience, and I sort of got hooked on that. And since then I've worked at Unity. I've shipped VR titles that I've written myself, and also with amazing crews. But basically, like if I can make a game by myself, leave me alone with a room and a computer, and I can make you movies, games, comics, tools, and tech. And unlike a lot of people in the AI space, I've actually generated my own training data either by hand or as a procedural artist using geometry nodes and other procedural means, generating synthetic data sets. I've also hired mocap people and artists to make data sets that I've then curated, labeled, and trained myself with my colleagues. And so I have like a pretty deep knowledge of what this landscape really is. And so there's a
Hang
lot
on
of
there a sec. I want to unpack that last one because people, I might have just gone soaring past some of the listeners. So what you're saying there is, in a way, you're refuting one of the claims that the people who are against AI often say, which is they'll say, well, generative AI depends on the work of artists, and it can only exist if it steals the art from artists, and it has no value without that. And what I'm hearing you say is, well, no, in fact, there's a lot of ways to engage with generative AI and train a model, and that
yeah.
can include creating your own art or training it on your own work, or you can commission original works and train it on that. In other words, there are ethical approaches. I think it's important to break that out because I had another guest on the show make that exact claim. And at the time, I thought that claim was pretty feeble, but I didn't get really a chance to refute it.
Well,
So now here I can do it, refute it a little bit more resoundingly.
well, there's two sides of it, right? Because on the one hand, you can train a model entirely off of your own data, but if you don't have a critical mass of enough data, the model doesn't behave in this sort of magical way that we associate with Gen AI. And so to get it to a critical mass where it starts to actually do surprising things, you have to get it across the threshold, so to speak. And so you can train a model that's a refinement on top of a much bigger model underneath. But those big models, they're called foundation models. They're essentially, between 6 gigabytes and 90 gigabytes files of numbers. They don't actually contain any of the training data. They just contain weights. And what they do is they behave kind of like a Moog synthesizer, where as you modulate noise, literally random noise, like cloud bursting a cloud, it will kind of magnetically pull towards things that are a mixture of 1,000 things that are kind of like what you might be asking for. And so those are the things where the voices of the past, of antiquity, of the last 50 years of digital media, every piece of text, everything that was public on the web that got transferred over TCP/IP, got all those packets got used to train a weight. So it's not just artists, it's every security camera on the outside of a building being transcribed for whatever happened that day, every book written in every language. If you ask a medical question in Spanish, it goes and looks at all the medical textbooks in Spanish and it answers in Spanish. So if you ask,
Or it doesn't go and look at them. It's just referring to the weights, all the stuff that
it's
it's
just
previously
weights.
measured.
Yeah, and it's like you're rolling a metal marble across a billiard table full of magnets, and your metal marble swings around based on those magnets until it gets to stasis, and then that's the result you get. And so it's not the result of one single thing that it copied. It's actually a mixture of everything, and
I
by
think
everything I mean trillions of things.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to make. So the distinction you're making here now is there are no copies of pictures or songs or books. There's no copies inside of a generative AI model. It's not like a big scanning system or
No,
some sort of library or database. In other words, the metaphor that was explained to me, which I thought was quite good, they said, imagine that you are the world's greatest detective and you're asked to go through the Louvre museum and define each painting in such a way that it's like, empirically measurable. And you would go through and measure every brushstroke and the kinds of colors. You calibrate each of the colors until you got to so much data that you can actually distinguish, like, a Van Gogh or an Impressionist painting from something like a Dutch master or something that was done in the, in the medieval period. That you'd have calibrated your measurements so accurately that those styles could be represented mathematically. And that's a claim that they're making about generative AI. I mean, we have to speak in metaphors, but when you get in the copyright zone, you're always talking in
The
metaphors.
metaphors, I have a different metaphor, which is like there's a contrary metaphor of what it's not, and then a metaphor for what it is. And I like to point out that it's not a pile of stolen documents that some device is going back and retrieving and bringing to you. It's more like a constellation, a star field of a galaxy of weights, and you're beaming a spaceship into that weights, and whatever it's near has little gravity wells, and they pull you towards things. And so things that are really common and cliche and trite are like neutron stars. They're like black.
Yeah, they have a lot of gravity.
They suck you towards the symmetrical head
Yeah,
shapes or
that's why everything you generate on Midjourney looks like it came from a game.
Yeah,
You know,
and so
the cover of a game.
the first result is always the cliche. And so when you ask it a question, you have to know, like, hey, you've just discovered your front doorstep, but there's a wide open world in there. And the thing is that it is the echoes of humanity. It's everything that's ever been recorded. And so when you start to ask different questions and how you ask matters, you'll start to navigate into really strange, undiscovered countries of the past. And they're not copies. They're like weird, blurry hallucinations. And I think of it like a super collaboration with the past, that you're harmonizing with the past, and it's like a trifecta of collaboration. There's your intention as an artist. There's the control of the tool that you're using and interfacing with, like a Midjourney or a chain of thought or an agentic workflow or something, or the LLM. And then there's antiquity. And those three things are the collaborators. And antiquity is millions, if not billions of people. And so when people start talking about rights and how do we protect artists like myself, because Gollum's in all these models and my work is in there. And if you say old man and primate and wrinkled baby and a prune, you're going to find Gollum ish stuff in that zone. I can't lay 100% claim to it. I can say I contributed to some of those weights, but it's like a trumpet player playing a trumpet. It's like, well, you can play a trumpet long enough and eventually make it sound like it's talking like an actor, but it's going to be hard to get there. And that's where the the labels start to get really confusing is people start to see like, hey, there's this. If I say Andy Warhol soup can, well, it's seen every photograph of every soup can that's ever been on every product page ever.
Yeah.
And it's seen all of the tutorials on how to paint oil painting and impressionism, and it knows about impressionism, and it knows about chiaroscuro and lighting and shading and cylinders. And so just the fact that I say Campbell's soup can in a painterly style, I don't have to use Andy Warhol's name to have it produce stuff that looks like it came from the factory with Andy Warhol.
Let me stop you right there, though, because I think some folks listening might not get the point you're making, and I think it's an important point to tease out. So, I've met so many artists who have a misunderstanding of what copyright actually covers. Copyright only covers creative expression, just the expression, doesn't cover the facts, right? So if you wrote, like, say, a historical book, what's covered is the phrases that you use to convey that story, but the actual facts, sorry, those can't be copyrighted. And the same is true with artistic style. You know, in other words, if I wanted to go and make copies, not copies, let's say my own style, my own version of Andy Warhol paintings, I can't make a direct copy and sell that. I could make it for my own use. That's fine. That's not a problem. But if I made a direct copy, like basically if I literally plagiarized or cloned an Andy Warhol, that's copyright infringement because I'm copying the expression. But if I made my own paintings, original works, but used Andy Warhol style or any other artist style, that in fact is fine. That's not covered by copyright. You can't copyright a style. Some people complain about that because people are using the name of an artist, you know, to generate images. For instance, in Midjourney, it's a very good prompt because you can get to the style.
Yeah, I mean, this is as an artist, I spent a lot of time learning to find my own voice, which is a mixture of styles and techniques and random acts.
But you start by copying. Everybody does. Every comic book artist starts by drawing another comic book, right?
And, you know, like a great example of the same metaphor that I like to use is Ub Iwerks and the original animation cartoons in black and white. He invented the cartoon and the golden age of illustration, right? There's all these beautiful ink drawings from the very beginning of the printing press. That's a style. The reason cartoons exist is because you can't copyright a cartoon. You know, yeah, that's the Jerry is not the same as Bugs Bunny is not the same as Daffy Duck, is not the same.
Those are the expressions. And so, yeah, there was the expressions.
But the idea of an outline, you can't copyright that.
Nope.
So I think a lot of people, though, underneath all of this are two things. One is our artistic identity as creators, that we are creative people, and that we're feeling like that's being attacked. The identity as an artist is being attacked, because it does suck to do a really beautiful drawing, share it with your friends, and have someone go, "What prompt is that?" It hurts. It hurts your feelings.
Have you had that experience?
Oh, and a lot. And then
Like, your work looks like an AI did it. That's not a compliment. That's not a compliment.
But then on the flip side, there's people who are like, "Hey, I had this style. I was the only one who could do it, and now the phone's not ringing, and I'm having a hard time paying for my rent and my food, and my vocation is under attack." And those two things, the identity and the vocation, are making this a very volatile, very painful time for a lot of creative people. And if you have artists in your life, you have to sort of step back and go, look, they are, oddly enough, the first people being impacted by the drastic effects of technological automation. We thought it was going to be truck drivers.
They're not the first. They're not the first in history. Or you mean with AI?
In terms of AI, in terms of not the first. No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
For 300 years, we've had the Industrial Revolution. There are like entire categories of jobs have gotten wiped out.
Oh yeah, like if you go to the technology from like calligraphers and the printing press, like they drew beautiful letter L's in Latin in a monastery, and the printing press came along and ended the vocation of the calligrapher. But it also led way to
an electric light ended the vocation of being a chandler, and cardboard boxes ended the vocation of being a cooper. I mean, there are many, many jobs that have been eliminated. We tend to be, it's a funny thing is we have collective amnesia as a society, right? So these technological shifts come pretty frequently, a lot more frequently than we want to believe. And whole categories of jobs are wiped out. Just think of the transition to the automobile. Everybody that worked in a stable or grew hay or, groomed a horse or made a saddle or a boot, all those people got unemployed. But new jobs are created. And actually, the history tends to suggest the new jobs are better than the old jobs, because a lot of the old jobs were manual labor, like basically humans working like a dray animal or people working like a machine. And those are the ideal jobs for machines to replace. I guess the part you're talking about now is what's scary is we think that we always had a refuge in intellectual labor. If you were a white collar worker or an artist or a creative person, somehow you were immune to automation. And even recently there was that meme about how Sergey Brin from Google said that it would be wonderful. Artificial intelligence will be wonderful because everybody will be free to make art, right? And all the drudge work will be done by the machines. And it turns out, sadly, joke's on us, the machines are making the art and we're still stuck with the drudge.
Well, I think it's a transition period. I mean, I think if you have a machine that you want to, fold your laundry and do your dishes, it has to know the difference between a plate with Mickey Mouse on it and Mickey Mouse. It has to know that, like, you don't want your robot that's washing the dishes to say like, oh, cannot wash the Mickey Mouse plate because I'm not allowed to see Mickey Mouse because of copyright protection. Can't clean the Mickey Mouse plate. And you don't want your kid's favorite sweater that's got a copyright image on it to not be allowed to be washed or picked up or thrown in the washing machine because the robot's not allowed to see it. And if the robot's allowed to see it,
one of my favorite subjects, the overreach of the copyright mafia, right? This is a gigantic pernicious effect of the industrialization of culture. A completely different subject, but I can go there with you. I love it. Well, Bay, tell me this then. So should we be worried? Is that something we should be concerned about? You and I are both artists. Obviously, you've embraced AI with both hands. You're diving in with both feet. Should I?
I would encourage everyone who's an artist to get into it. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what a clip solve is and what using weighted noise actually is and how it works and what it is. It's a discovery, not a contraption. It's not a piece of software. It's not a device. It's not something that's owned by a big AI bros. It's a discovery that weighted noise, when you have a critical mass of a wave around 0.8, manages to do things that are very surprising with multiple inputs and multiple outputs. And they can be controlled if you know what you're doing. And it was given away for free to everyone. You can run it on your local machines with no money. And you can even run it with low power. And as we're getting better at the algorithms and better at the hardware, it's going to be very cheap and it's going to be very ubiquitous. And it will teach people in destitute parts of the world who have no access to education. It will teach them how to get out of poverty or solve drastic problems or even save lives. It's going to have a huge impact on our civilization, but it needs to be embraced by creative people so that it's not just bad actors using it and people who are trying to exploit. It needs to be creatively wielded, I think, just like noise or the synthesizer or the jazz trumpet or the printing press needed to be creatively wielded to turn into comic books. To turn into
You don't
novels.
actually, you're making a really good point. I think a lot of folks who listen to the show might not be aware of this, but back in the day when synthesized music actually finally got good enough, it moved past the kind of Kraftwerk era into kind of the symphonic or faux symphonic sound. And one of the artists who was at the very front end of that was Vangelis. And he did the soundtrack to
Blade Runner.
no, I'm thinking the other film, Chariots of Fire.
There you go.
And interestingly, he ran into real trouble in Hollywood because he didn't need an orchestra. He could do the whole soundtrack just with one artist, and that was considered industry unfriendly because he unemployed. He basically made the orchestra irrelevant. So there was big resistance towards that, and actually there was a move to like banish that kind of art. And a lot of directors steered clear for many years of using synthesized music because they would be considered pariahs by the recording artists who did the orchestra. So there is this sort of historical moment that was about 30 years ago. It's a long time ago, maybe more, 40 years ago. Whoa. Anyway, it's a long time ago, but we seem to have an echo of that right now because here in Hollywood, where I live, there are definitely motion picture directors and filmmakers who are interested in using AI. Some of them are dabbling with it. But then you've got these voices from the guilds. And I've talked to folks on both sides of the issue, certainly talked to plenty of people in the Writers Guild about this issue. And they are vociferously anti-AI in a way that I think is kind of striking. I'll give an example. When the strike was going on, the headquarters for Netflix is right down the hill from my house here. And so I stopped by and I was talking to some of the people who were on the strike, who were marching around with signs and picketing. And I said, "So what's your feeling about ChatGPT?" And they're like, "ChatGPT is a plagiarism machine." And I'm like, "No kidding. Have you used it?" And they're like, "No, of course not. The guild told us it's bad." And I'm like, "So you're protesting against the technology. You have actually no idea, no firsthand experience of what the technology is capable of." "Well, it's bad. All it does is copy our work." I'm like, "Really? I don't think I could get it to copy your work. I don't even know what work you're referring to here." And so I think there's this giant misperception or misapprehension of what these tools are actually capable of. And you said a thing to me the other day that I thought was really interesting, and I want to make sure our audience hears it. Um, you said most people's experience with AI is that they type bad prompts because it is just a blank space. You got to type in something. So you type the first thing that pops into your head. And what do you know? You get kind of a mediocre result. And if you do that a couple times, you're going to be like, "Oh, this thing's mediocre. It generates mediocrity."
Yeah.
And your point is, well, if you get a little savvier and you put a little effort, a little research into what you're doing as a prompt, you can actually get some really impressive results. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. The metaphor I like to use is that it's a trumpet. It has 3 notes and you can play it. And if you practice and you treat it like an art form, you can modulate noise in such a way that it becomes jazz. Now, you could also just walk up to it like a horn honker, honk it, go,
Like a kazoo. Like a kazoo.
and just declare that jazz is stupid and all jazz is dumb because you honked the horn once.
Some people feel that way about jazz.
And so when I look at people who write articles about, AI, and they say, "I asked a dumb question and I got a dumb response," or I asked, a recent one is, there were middle school children were asking middle school questions, and it was responding like a middle school bully. And I was like, well, maybe letting middle school children onto the internet and then training weights off of it was a bad idea. But if you ask a question like a doctor, you get answers like a doctor. You ask a question in Spanish, you get answers in Spanish. You ask a question like a painter, you get answers like a painter.
I've been so impressed by Claude, by Anthropic's Claude, the new version, Claude 3 Sonnet. because you can have a proper conversation with it and it'll start to teach you stuff. And it's super, you can say, like, what are the countries that export the most TV shows and films? And one of the questions I asked the other day, and it led me down this rabbit hole where I started to unpack like international TV distribution in a way I'd never really understood it
And
before.
and one of the things that people like to point out is that like AI will lie to you and it'll give you
Yeah,
it will confidently give you incorrect information. But
that's right.
it's kind of like those two door knockers in Labyrinth where you know they're liars, but you've got to figure out a way to trick the liars into telling you the right information. And what you do is you look for patterns in the feedback, the same way that I did at Valve, where you look for the patterns in the playtest feedback until you start to predict the response. Even though it's totally random, sometimes people just say, yeah, it's this and this and this and this. And you're like, oh, those things kind of line up. And so if you ask multiple times in multiple ways, you start to see like the truth coming through the fog of hallucination. It's kind of like the way I like to think of it is that each time you have a chat or summon an agent, you're essentially summoning an idiot parrot who has no idea who they are until you tell them who they are. And then you go, you are a doctor. And he goes, I am a doctor. And you speak Spanish. Soy un doctor en español. And then you condition him as a little idiot Igor to be what you need. And he has the superpower, which is that he can reach back into his mind to all of antiquity and find information. But he's an idiot parrot. He's going to be wrong. And then at a certain point, the longer you talk to him, he's going to go mad. They only have about 8192 words before they go bonkers. And so you have this like sweet spot in the curve where you can try to get them to be useful. And if you can get multiple of them to talk in a chorus with each other, you can do incredible things. It's called a mix of experts or a chain of thought or agentic programming. And so for me, when I'm making a prompt, it's not about making one prompt. It's about having a conversation in a roundtable circle with synthetic idiot parrots that I've conditioned myself. And I've said, you are aggressive. You have the Myers-Briggs personality type of this. Whenever you hear an idea, you're going to think very carefully about how it impacts money. And then you are a free thinker and your horoscope sign is this. And you think everything is touchy-feely and your emotional IQ is really high. Now I'm going to give both of you this piece of information and I want you to both tell me your opinions on it. And then I'm going to make another agent who's going to be the judge, who's going to look at this from whatever lens I think is important. And we're going to mix and melt concepts together until it turns into a description of a scene that I will then describe everything in a bedroom that is possibly going to be there. And then I'm going to give it to a cinematographer who's going to make it into an image. And then I'm going to paint over the top of that image. And then I'm going to use that image as a conditioning prompt for another AI that's going to turn it into a picture, which I'm going to then feed it into a video model to make it move.
So, Bay,
Now,
as you're saying this, it sounds to me like you're a conductor and you're conducting an orchestra, but the orchestra in this case isn't humans with instruments. It's different AIs. You're actually like
yeah.
composing with a series of voices that you conditioned or trained in AI. But it's the combination of them that gets you to the result, the artistic result that you're looking for.
And I'm conditioning them. I'm telling them you
Mhm.
are this type of person or this kind of bias. I want you to approach this problem this way, and I want you to contrast it in this way. And I'm going to juxtapose the two of you together, and I'm going to control your weights against each other. And then I'm going to override you this way, and then I'm going to steer the whole thing, sort of stick the landing myself as a human.
Cool.
And human intention matters.
So that's the formula. Okay, in the second half of the show, we're going to forecast a little bit. We're going to talk about the implications of this for art and entertainment and media. But before we go there, let me do a game that we like to play with our guests so we get to know them. This is called the lightning round. And so get ready because I'm going to ask you a series of short questions. So you can give me a short answer or a long, but short's probably better because we've been going a little long here.
I like to rant.
So brace yourself, Bay Raitt, because this is the lightning round. First question. What was your first experience of science fiction in a film or book or TV show?
Star Wars, because I'm Gen X and I've got a gray beard. But I was really lucky that my parents were friends with a guy named Paul Krause who worked at Industrial Light and Magic, who sculpted the original X-wing out of styrofoam. He's a surfboard maker, and they took me to his house and show kind of after Empire Strikes Back. And I remember seeing that he was a real person and that he was a nice guy. And I was friends with his family, and he was showing me a little bit about how they actually kit bashed the spaceships for Star Wars together. And it was the first time in my mind I was like, that's a job. That's a thing you can go do instead of swinging a hammer or driving a truck or having different kinds of jobs. That you can have a job making
Toys.
making X-wing fighters and toys, and that was my first exposure to sci-fi as a person, as a real person. So I've tried.
Right on. That's a cool thing. So it inspired you to be a maker. That's a beautiful
Yeah,
story.
yeah,
Okay, next question. Is there a futurist who has influenced you and how?
yeah. I've been really lucky to work with a whole ton of futurists, from Larry Malone at Nietzscheman on Mirai to John Shields at Weta and Joe Letary at Weta and Peter Jackson and Richard Taylor at the Weta Workshop and Gabe Newell at Valve and just a long list of teachers and futurists.
Wow.
They've all influenced me. They've all had really interesting things to say, and they all
So
really good about getting out of the way of their ego.
let me offer this because usually when we ask that question, people will say something like Ray Kurzweil or Alvin Toffler, like, people who are famous as being futurists and forecasters. But the people you just mentioned are people who make entertainment for a living. And they're people who apply technology in the most advanced ways to changing, like literally bending the trajectory of their medium. That's the kind of futurists we like. We call them practical futurists. Like they're people who apply the techniques to the work that they're doing to build the future that they desperately want to live in. Okay, great. Last question here for you. Is there a motion picture or book or TV show that represents the future that you most would love to live in?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. Gosh, I really like the Culture series by Ian M. Banks. I know Elon Musk likes it too. I think I took
You and Elon are like this.
no. But I do like those books. I like the world that they represent. I like Star Trek and I like Spock and all that kind of stuff. But I do think that I grew up as a hippie kid in Northern California on a sustainable living commune. I grew up in a yurt. My parents were yurt builders. I didn't have a flush toilet until I moved out of the house. We grew our own food on our roof. Like, my name is Bay Leaf. Like, I'm a super hippie kid. And so for me, I've got a real soft spot for progressive hippie liberal culture at the far end of the spectrum.
So the Ian Banks books gave you that feeling.
Yeah, and the idea that you could have a like solar punk, where you have a mixture of super Paleolithic and traditional things and super high tech future things. One of my dear friends builds rammed earth houses, and he makes sure that the walls have a thermal mass thickness so that the midday heat from the sun arrives to the interior wall at midnight to warm the house, and it keeps the house at 72 degrees all the time without a furnace or air conditioning and beautiful climate. And he also has Wi-Fi and USB and micro hydro power, and he's the guy who actually taught me how to use a command line. So the same guy has this like rammed earth ancient building techniques with Adobe, and also taught me how to use a computer. And so in my mind, it's those kinds of stories that merge the two of them together. And so, like, in the Ian Banks novels, there's some really great examples of those kinds of things happening, and player of games and use of weapons and consider Philbius. And
right on. Okay, we're going to go to a break, folks. You're listening to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tursik, and my guest this week is the artist Bay Raitt. We'll be back with more futuristic talk about art after this break.
Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcast, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, and Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
Welcome back to The Futurist. It's Rob Tursik, and this week I'm talking to Bay Raitt. And Bay is an artist, but he's an interesting artist in two respects. The first one is that he's worked in many different entertainment media, and we talked a little bit about that in the beginning of the show, starting out in comic books and making your way into films and motion pictures, especially animation for feature films, and then eventually the game industry, and now you're working with artificial intelligence. So that's one way. You're an artist who has moved through different media, and you're not afraid to use technology. In fact, one of the things that struck me as we were talking about your background in the beginning of the show is that you've lived through several of these tectonic transformations of the art environment. Not just the economics of it or the business of it, but also the creative practice of it, and even kind of the role of the artist has evolved. For instance, your experience making the Source filmmaker for Valve opened up the creative process to the fans, to the people who actually used to be known as the audience, and you made them creators or co-creators or participants in the show in some fashion. And it's my observation that something like that is going on right now, but on a massive scale with artificial intelligence, where we're now able to ingest and learn from all the collective works of all the different cultures in history and make that available to anyone who wants to use it and get this for free. I know there's many, many arguments. We've talked about some of the arguments against this and why it might be an infringement on someone's rights. But for a moment, let's just embrace that possibility. The idea that, let's say, on the planet Earth, there's 8 billion people, and half of them are below average in their communication skills. It's just a mathematical certainty that half the people on the planet are not as good as other people at communicating. And if a tool like ChatGPT can help those folks easily and effortlessly upgrade the way they communicate, that's a net win for everybody. I mean, honestly, I have to say, like, how much junk do you have to sort through in your inbox every day, whether it's your mailbox or your email inbox or any message inbox that you've got, where it's poorly written or poorly spelled, or the ideas are half formed or half baked. And now you can say, well, gosh, if you just took a second and asked ChatGPT to punch that up, it would probably be 10 times better. And that's a service for everybody. So I look at that and I'm thinking, gosh, on this planet, we have an awful lot of people who don't consider themselves creators, and many, many, many people who maybe dream of writing a book. They say 1 out of 3 people would love to write a book, but most never do, thank God. Imagine this. Generative AI might confer upon those people the expressive capability, the ability for them to express themselves for the very first time. I think that's a heroic unlock for humanity. And for sure, it's going to shift the power of storytelling from a handful of skilled professionals who get paid a lot of money to do that. It's going to shift it out to a heck of a lot of other people. So there'll be a lot of voices and a lot of new works being created. But on the whole, I have to think that's a net win for humanity. Okay, that's my little diatribe. You bounce back and tell me if I got it right, or if you can correct me. I would love to be sophisticated. Please go for it.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, the world is going to become a more beautiful place because people are going to be able to express themselves. And there are people out there who, want to make a personal statement, a love letter to a loved one who happens to like a particular kind of flower and a particular kind of thing, and they don't have the money to pay an artist to do a watercolor painting of it, or to make an animation of it, or to write a poem about it, and they don't have the skill or the resources, or even maybe just the time. But and AI could help them do that.
Yeah.
And instead of giving them a Hallmark card, it's going to be bad for the people at Hallmark.
Yeah.
But it's going to be really great for the people who receive those love letters.
Yeah.
And for me, I can't deny my own humanity of saying that's actually really important. I got to say that, like, you can make your grandmother cry with a wonderful gift specifically made for her, or you can thrill your children about a story about the trauma that they're working through with characters that are safe, that they can think about and project themselves into in a safe way that you've constructed for them.
You could even teach them to take those stories and start to build their own stories.
I mean, I think about Shel Silverstein and the wonderful children's books of The Giving Tree, and the books that I was raised on with the Rainbow Goblins and the others. And I think about those kind of stories, how, I was very lucky to have a mother who could see the troubles that I was having as a kid and would find stuff from her friends and friends of friends, or even make art to help me on my journey. And the idea that more people would benefit from that would probably make the world a more tender and caring place, which I think is important.
I mean, it sounds corny to say it, right? It does sound a little corny to say it, but the truth is, if you can find a way to express yourself, it's going to help. One of the reasons people get frustrated and sometimes quite angry is that they lack an expressive capability, right? They want to say something very desperately, but they're too timid, or they can't find the words, or they can't quite get the right emotional context straight. And whatever the reason, there's a million reasons why people can't do it. But I think these tools can help us tap into an expressive spirit. The other thing I'm thinking about is that they can teach us. And I don't think we tend to think about AI as a teacher. But the more I use it, the more I'm starting to learn things from it. And I think that's true for anyone who wants that, right? You don't have to find that. You might take a little work to figure it out. The example I always use when I talk about Midjourney, which I admit, an obsession with. I love it. I'll spend hundreds of dollars on generating images each month. But the thing I always think about is, when you're trying to learn how to do art, they take you to a museum. You sit down on the floor, that big marble floor with a big pad, and you copy a Rembrandt or you copy a sketch by some other great artist, a Van Gogh sketch or something, if they happen to have one of those. And in any major art museum during the weekdays in the morning, you'll find art students sitting on the floor doing that in just about every museum in the world. Yeah, it's how we've taught people to become artists for thousands of years, right? And the way you learn how to be a writer is you basically mimic other writers. And the way you draw a comic book is you copy comic books. That's what I did when I was a kid. And so I think that, in a way, AI, by ingesting the work of all these artists, is replicating that process. But now it's conferring to you, the operator, the user of the AI, it's conferring this massive advantage because now you've got the entire lexicon of humanity at your disposal if you want to tap it.
Every art technique that's ever been taught is in there. And so
Every expressive work that's ever been written or made is there, right? It's there in some way. And then bear in mind, you pointed out before, it's not a copy. It's not like a database or a filing cabinet or a library where that actual work is stored away. Not at all. It learned from it in the same way that we learn, maybe in a more mathematical fashion, but it's learning from it the same way you're looking at a picture and you're learning about the picture. You're noticing technique, you're noticing color, value, hue, and the other things that go to comprise a picture. And then it's able to give you that as a facility that you might not have in your own fingers or in your own creative imagination.
Yeah.
To me, this is like the ultimate assistant, and it's not limited to art. I know we've been talking about art, but you can apply that to just about every field. Because I know they're doing it
in a teacher. You can give it a picture of a painting and say, decompose this painting into all the steps it took to make it, and then make a tutorial so that I can run it backwards so that I can learn to make this painting from the rule of thirds composition on forward. But then you can take the exact same thing and say, here's this object, reverse engineer it back to sand and teach me how to build it. And like, there's no teacher on earth. There's never been a human being who could do that.
Or we do that in every possible discipline and every possible format, right?
But it means that we have to change our thinking around the idea that a visit to the museum is a heist, or that taking a class is thievery. You're not stealing from your teacher. If you go and get inspired at the museum and glean some insight about the nature of composition and bring it home to your own work, you didn't steal it from the museum. Insight is not a heist. And I think that idea that this is my secret recipe comes to the point of copyright and why copyright exists in the first place, which was we wanted to give inventors a window of time to benefit from their invention so that we could encourage people to invent more, which is what made about the modern age. It was like, hey, I'm gonna take a year off and I'm gonna work on this thing called a car. And if I do it right, I'm gonna profit from it for a little while and I'm gonna have a head start on everybody else. And before anybody can copy me, the government is gonna make sure that I'm the only guy, so I can be motivated to justify the investment of time, heartbeats, to make it happen. And those heartbeats of human heartbeats, we need to figure out a new way of thinking about how to encourage that kind of stuff. Because when this stuff does spread out the way we were talking about earlier, where everyone is using it, you're going to have this very personalized relationship to media that's going to become almost like an alphabet or a language, where everyone is going to be speaking this multimedia language to each other of pictures and video and interactive stuff. And the 24 letters of the English alphabet is one of the layers inside this sort of multi-dimensional language that we're all learning to speak. And it does mean...
Okay, now tell me this. Here's a question for you, because I know you've been thinking about this a lot. There's this phenomenon that I call the blank canvas. Some people call it the blank page, where you kind of get maybe, you get verklempt. Like you sit in front of a blank page and you can't think about what to write. Even if you had a great idea 10 minutes ago, you're on the spot and you can't summon the idea. I have that every time I go in the art studio. I try to make a painting without a clear idea of what I'm going to make before I walk in. If I don't have an idea in my head when I walk in the studio, I'm going to ruin a $40 canvas because I'm not going to make a good picture. So how can an AI help people who don't know how to tell a story or don't know how to structure a narrative in a conventional way? Can an AI actually teach them those skills? Can it teach somebody the hero's journey or the writer's journey?
It's read every book on narrative construction for the last 2,000 years in every language.
If you were going to try to create, let's say a teen story, a teen sci-fi story, How would you go about doing it with Anthropic Claude? What would your recipe be for that?
So I like to start in a different way every time I do something. I'm a very bored person, and so I like to try and do things weird directions. And because Claude is connected to so much information that I will never be able to absorb in 10 lifetimes. Each time I venture into it, I think I see it like a giant landscape, a brave new world, so to speak. Should I go to the desert or should I go to the mountains? And so what I'll do is I'll go, okay, I want to tell a story for these teenagers, and I'm like, well, let's have it be about text messaging and having socialization over distance. Let's talk about telepathic connections and social connections over distance, and tell me about great letter writers in history. And Claude will tell me a bunch of stuff, and eventually it'll come up with something that I might not have known about. Maybe some letters to a young poet from Rilke was translated into Swahili, and then someone made a comedy about it. Whatever. I don't know what it is, right? You discover some random thing and you're like, tell me more about that. And it starts to tell you some of it. Some of it's hallucinated, some of it's real. You start to corroborate it. You start to ask again, follow up questions. And slowly the interesting angle starts to present itself to you, and you're like, oh man, this poet had this really interesting view on letter writing and what objects he should put in the mail to someone else. And there was this mail carrier who was willing to carry a 600-pound object on horseback to this mountain person, and this woman kept getting these 600-pound gifts from a stranger, and they formed this relationship. How can I translate that into a TikTok user? And then Claude will go, these are the nearby weights of that.
It'll give you 20 ideas.
And then eventually you'll be like, oh, this weird hallucination glitch plus this weird true fact plus this weird angle gave me an idea. And then you can say, Claude, take that idea and distill it down into a log line that I can use as a premise to feed into a 7-act structure that follows the rules of Robert McKee and Save the Cat and Aristotle's Poetics to make a classic story plot structure that can be told out loud in an oratory style at a campfire at a summer camp for teenagers. And it goes, what do you mean by campfire? And you tell it like, is there any books that have ever been written on campfire writing? And it goes, yes, in France, there was this woman who wrote these essays on oratory for children. I'm like, tell me more about that. Oh, that's an interesting angle. Okay, use those angles to rework this premise into a story, and then give me 10 versions of it. Ooh, version number 7. Copy, paste, rewrite a little bit. New chat, new idiot parrot. Hey, idiot parrot, here's an idea that's a mixture of all that stuff that I did, all that weird research, and this weird refactor that I made by hand. Turn this into a story, give it to 11 Labs, and have Burt Reynolds read it to me while I do my dishes.
What's incredible? I mean, that's like
the prompt is a journey.
So you're having a dialogue with this machine, and sometimes you're asking it stuff. Sometimes you're redirecting it to a different topic or a related topic. Sometimes you're saying, hang on a second, idea number 7 was the most interesting one. Unpack that idea or expand on that idea a little bit. So you're acting like a director, you're acting like a choreographer, you're acting like let's say, an orchestra conductor or something, maybe a composer. I mean, it's an interesting thing, right? You're putting on many different hats. One thing that's very clear in your narrative there is you're very active, and you're very active in a creative way, but you're engaged with this machine. Like you're having a conversation with this machine that is spurring you to make new connections and ideas you never thought of before.
Oh yeah. Like I just to interrupt, like I have a iPad mini here. I have worn down my Apple Pencil nibs because I draw so much because of AI. And like I've written so much because of that experience. Like it is very much, to me, one of the more creative things I've ever done in my life. And I've made a lot of sculptures, I've made a lot of drawings, I've made a lot of animations, I've made a lot of films. This is really a creative door that is super exciting. And to hear so many creative people be completely hostile and afraid of it is a missed opportunity in my view.
At a minimum, they owe it to themselves to at least spend an afternoon using the Raitt technique and get into a conversation with it and see what they come up with. Okay, hey, Bay, give me a forecast. We like to end the show with a picture of what the world will be like 5, 10, 20 years out. So let's imagine that generative AI keeps getting better, because in the last 2 years, it's improved tremendously. Let's imagine it keeps getting better, and let's imagine more and more people start to use it. What's the world going to look like? Just say 2030, just 7 years from now, or 4 years, sorry, 6 years from now.
Well, my hope is that the the act of telling the world about it before it showed up will bear fruit. We could have Technologists could have kept it secret, kept it private, and just showed up as wizards with a terrifying robot army. And instead, they open sourced it, told everybody about it, and I've been sharing it and talking about it and blabbing about it and irritating everyone with it. And I think the result of that is that when it starts to become physical, when robots start to actually do your laundry and build the products and do things and free up time, that we will have, as a society, come up with a way to talk about automation so that we can actually take the profits of automation and use it to pay for the livelihoods of the displaced workers and make society better. And my hope is that in 7 years, when all these things are coming to pass, that people will work less and play more, and the world will be a more beautiful place. And more people will be able to enjoy the good parts of life, and we'll have start taking humanity out of its nosedive and putting it into an upward arc.
One of the things you and I were talking about recently is that there are an awful lot of stories that are not told on this planet. And the reasons for that vary. Some people, as we said earlier, don't have the expressive capability themselves to tell their own story. Other people don't have the resources to do it, or they're too busy in their lives. They're managing too many things at once. Or maybe they're downtrodden and they simply don't have the resources that way to tell their stories. But in other words, of the 8 billion people on the planet, there are many billions, many more than 7 billion stories that are never being told that could otherwise be told. And my thinking is that that's a great unlock for humanity. If we can find a way to give people this expressive capability, it's going to help us understand each other. My hope for the internet and this hyper-connected society is that we learn to develop global empathy. And so far that hasn't happened. You could argue, frankly, it's going the other direction where people are, siloed off and they're very contentious, and it's creating more tribal behavior and animosity. But my hope is that we begin to develop an understanding of each other, and we have the ability to put ourselves in the other person's shoes and imagine what life is like from their perspective. And I can only believe that conferring this incredible, exquisite apparatus on people, this expressive capability on the mass number of people on the planet, I can only think that that's going to be a net gain for humanity.
I think so. I think that when you have a when you have I like to refer to AI as like the giant alien squid brain with my friends. And that, like, if you have the giant alien squid brain that you can ask any detailed questions at any resolution on any topic and get some sort of relevant, useful information back, even if it's hallucinated, and you can follow a line of reasoning until you feel reasonably confident through critical thinking and experience that was good information, that you're going to end up in a state where um, ignorance is a choice. And there are people who are going to defend ignorance because the information pressure is too high, and they would rather just pretend that the world is something that it's not. And then there's other people who are going to embrace it, and those other people are going to become incredibly impactful. Not necessarily rich, but impactful. They're going to be able to help each other and help themselves and affect the world in profound ways. And there's going to be some undeniable things. I suspect that by having the ability to echolocate with antiquity in the way that we've are starting to learn how to, that some creative genius madman lunatic will come up with some idea so profound that there will be a before and after that moment, whether it's cold fusion or kicking cancer in the teeth or solving deliberative democracy with computation or making some aspect of the world just flat out better. Like, we learned how to fold protein in the last 5 years. We still donate blood and have to farm animals because we can't make protein. But in the last 5 years, we designed a perfect protein that could defang a virus that was eating us, and we used AI to do it. Maybe we should acknowledge the fact that, like, that upward curve has some benefits. Oh my God. It's not just making it so that the deaf people can have a closed captioning system in their glasses, or a paraplegic can walk with a mech suit. It's all of that and. And I hope that, like, that aspect of it is where it all lands. I forgot your original question. I started ranting.
It's okay, man. We're having a good riff. Good riff. Hey, Bay. So to wrap up the show, tell us where we can find you on the web. People are listening, want to know more about Bay Raitt and your own creative process. Where do you share these thoughts? Do you share them in public?
I do in different ways. I'm a bit of an odd social media user. I try to keep my follower count low. I've had millions of people connected to my machines. I've lost controls of accounts because too many people were messaging them. I've seen what that's like. I don't like it. And so I try to be.
Do you lock down your socials to
if I make a post and it starts to go viral, I delete the post. That's not a normal behavior.
Nice.
And I do it because I want the account. I like having visual bookmarks and I like having access.
Dude, you're failing in the information society. Just let me tell you.
I'm loving it. It's fantastic.
Happily dropping out.
If you look for me on my online moniker is Spiraloid, like spiral and then OID. And so if you go to Linktree or Facebook or Threads or Blue Sky, anywhere.
So people can track you down. They can find you with the keyword Spiraloid.
Spiraloid.
All right, everybody. This has been another fun episode of The Futurists with my guest, Bay Raitt. Thank you, Bay, for sharing those artistic thoughts about artificial intelligence. And every week, folks, we'll be bringing you another person who is thinking about the future and using the tools and techniques at their disposal to build the future that they envision. I'm going to thank the folks at Provoke Media who make the show possible. And of course, I always like to thank our fans who send us suggestions and comments and the names of speakers they'd like to hear from. We're always open to that information. We appreciate every single person who talks about the show. And next week, I'll be back with yet another futurist for you. Until then, we'll see you in the future. Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.